Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, a special deep dive episode that we record exclusively for our patrons over on Patreon and our academics on the Bestseller Academy. And we welcome back a long-time friend of the podcast. Paul Austin Ardoin is the USA Today best-selling author of the Fenway, Stevenson Mysteries and the Woodhead and Becker Mysteries. Paul has a BA in creative writing from the University of California, and he makes his home now in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was previously on episode 281, which was an episode we did about BookBub, which I'll put a link in the show notes so you can check that out. But Paul is back with a new non-fiction book, From Zero to Four Figures, which brilliantly demystifies the process of making money as an indie author. And if you've published one or more books and you're struggling to get sales, I'm just going to leave a little pause there. Yes, that's most of us. This is the book for you. Paul, welcome back to the podcast. How are you today, sir?
I am chickadee boo, Mark.
Excellent stuff.
And hey, I don't know if I can live up to that wonderful introduction. Thanks so much.
The book, I downloaded a copy of the book immediately, and it does lay everything out very, very clearly. What was it that inspired you to put this book together for folks? Well,
I was in the position where I had put two books out and I wasn't getting many sales. This was about 5 years ago, right, shortly after I began my author career and published for the first time. And the books that I was getting and the podcasts that I was listening to, a lot of them focused on trying to make it big, getting your first 10,000 readers. And the idea that we could put a lot of effort into this and invest a lot of money into ads and everything like that. I mean, I bought some advertising courses, and it took me about a year before I realized I'm not. This isn't where I am yet. I shouldn't be spending money on ads. So I was talking to my editor, and he said, there's a real lack of books for the people who are in that position. Where they're selling to their friends and family, and maybe they're even getting some good reviews, and they've got maybe a handful of people who follow them, but they're not cracking that 3-figure mark, much less 4-figure every month. And they really need to go to the next level so that they then can start taking advantage of some of these other marketing efforts like advertising and things like that. And another thing is that a lot of books either focus on craft or focus on marketing. And as I have made a lot of mistakes in the last 5 years, it's become very clear to me that there is a certain kind of book that is going to be more successful than others. And focusing on those aspects of craft is something that a lot of marketing books don't do. In fact, there are a lot of marketers out there who say, number one, you have to have a great book. Okay, now let's move on. And the definition of what makes a great book is sometimes conflated with what will sell to readers. And those things are actually two very different things. And so I spend the first part of the book defining what makes a book able to sell, not necessarily writing to market, but what can you do as an author to make that book as appealing as possible to readers? And then we can get into the marketing aspects.
Yeah, that's very good. Now, folks, we're going to focus on 3 particular sections of the book. And believe me, this is just tip of the iceberg stuff. If you want more, it's all in Paul's book. And again, I'll put a link in the show notes so you can check it out. But initially, we're going to talk about setting goals and financial expectations. Then we're going to talk about meeting reader expectations, which I think ties into what you were talking about, Paul, about writing the kind of book that is going to sell in the first place. And then finally, we're going to talk about using your book as an advertisement and all sorts of other stuff spinning off from that. So strap in, folks. So, Paul, let's talk about setting goals and financial expectations. We sort of covered it a bit, but, a lot of authors say, but yay, I've written my book, now what? And there are courses out there that kind of make you think it's just a matter of throwing money at it. From $5 a day, you can be a gajillionaire or whatever. And having tried that myself, it doesn't work. But I love how you've broken this down. And your first principle is don't expect overnight success. So tell us about setting goals, financial expectations.
Well, yeah, and certainly when I first published my novel, everybody was saying, "Oh, don't expect overnight success." But in my head, and in a lot of these marketing books that I was getting, I kind of thought, well, maybe this book will fill that need that a lot
Yes.
of people have, and maybe I will become the next Paula Hawkins and sell 1 million books and get a Netflix series and be able to choose from the yacht catalog which one I want. And of course that didn't happen. And of course it takes a lot of hard work and effort to even get to the point where you're breaking even with that. And I want to make sure that part of it is I want to differentiate my book from the others out there, but I also want the realistic expectations out there that this is going to take some time to build. It took me 2 years to get to $1,000 a month from the moment I published my first book. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a reasonable expectation with the kind of work and the kind of investment that I'm talking about in this book. But I want to make sure that the people who buy this and open the book, they don't think they're going to be on the phone with screenwriters in 2 weeks, wondering whether or not Tom Cruise is going to be available to star in the major motion picture based on their book. That's just not realistic for the vast majority of self-published authors out there.
Absolutely. You talked about knowing your goals and running this like a business, and you really do have to set those goals. So what sort of goals should we be thinking about initially when we're setting out, if we're not going to be a millionaire and taking calls from Tom?
Right. So there are a few pieces that need to be your table stakes for your business. And they're really based on a couple of things. And first of all, it is writing a book that once readers get their hands on, they're going to want to read more from your catalog, whether that's the next book in your series or the next book that is set in your world or the next book in the same genre or what have you. And then the second thing is building that reader base that you can communicate with to let them know that your next book is out there, and to truly engage with them so that they're looking forward to not only your next book but your next communication with them. So there are those are the two real table stakes here, the books and the marketing.
Okay. And in terms of the financial outlay, what are we talking about here? Because the $5 a day thing, we've heard lots of times from all sorts of places. But where do we start with this? What can we? Is it just all about advertising, or
no?
Okay.
No, advertising. I don't condone advertising for anybody who isn't making $1,000 a month. I don't think that it is reasonable, and I don't think it's a good use of money. The first thing that I advocate is identifying which book in your series or your book in your catalog you want to put in front of people to make sure that when they read this, they want to read the next book you have. I call that an entry point novel. Quite often, it's the first book in a series. Mine is the first book in my Fenway Stevenson series, but it could be a variety of other things depending on the kind of thing you write. The second piece for this is getting it into other people's hands. Now, I have found great success with BookFunnel and Story Origin, putting that first book out there in exchange for an email, where you then can sign people up to your mailing list. And therefore you need something like MailChimp or MailerLite or Email Octopus or email author.email, something like that, where you can then not only communicate with the people who have downloaded that first book or read that first book, but you also own their email address. You're not building a Facebook group where Facebook owns that, or an Instagram account or TikTok, where something could happen where, I don't know, some billionaire takes over the site and destroys it in a matter of 6 months. And then you've lost the ability to communicate with the people that you built engagement with. You own that email list. And BookFunnel and Story Origin are not that expensive. They're $100 $100 a year for BookFunnel, where the entry level where you can start gathering email from the people who download whatever book or story you're downloading. Story Origin is even less than that. And they both give you ways to get your book into interested readers' hands. I had my mom, her cousin, and her cousin's dog on my mailing list when I first published Fenway 1. And I put that on BookFunnel as soon as I published the second book in the series. And I got 1,600 people on my mailing list within about 6 weeks. Now, I write in a popular genre of crime fiction. If you write in a less popular genre, that 1,600 might only be 200 or 500. But that's 200 or 500 people who have downloaded your book, who could potentially read your book. And when they get to the end, they might go, hey, this person's a good writer. I wonder what else they've done. And of course, if you put, a little preview of book 2 in the series at the end of your novel and make it easier for them to buy book 2 or your next book in the genre or whatever, it's even easier. And everything like this is interconnected in here, and it all cascades down. So, yes, you need BookFunnel, but that's not the only thing you need to do. You need to make sure that that book that you put out in BookFunnel has an easy way for the reader to get to the next book in your series. And once you've done that, you need to make sure that you are putting out a newsletter in a timely manner and so forth. It seems overwhelming. And it certainly is. There's a lot of work that's involved. But my hope is that, forget the ads, which are even more overwhelming. Forget a lot of the other issues. Forget social media, which is its own horrifically overwhelming thing. Focus on this set of activities. And my hope is that this book has put it together in a way that when readers read it, they go, all right, this is a lot of work, but I can do it. I see the way to get where I want to go and where I need to be.
I can testify it does, listeners. It's nice bite-sized chunks and laid out very, very well. Let's talk about meeting reader expectations, because this fascinated me, because not enough books on making it as an author, either indie or trad, cover this. I think everyone can learn from this. So you tell us in the book about the importance of reader expectations. What I love is you talk about the success, you talk about failures, fiascos, and saving a failure. So what were the biggest lessons you learned from all of these? And what do you mean by meeting reader expectations?
So when you purchase a book, when anybody purchases a book, and whenever anybody says to themselves, I don't have anything to read right now, and ignoring the big stack on their nightstand, they go through a process where they go to a real bookstore or a virtual bookstore and they start to browse. Maybe they do some search terms and so forth. But when they see the cover, when they read the book description, what we often call a blurb, when they do the look inside, they want to make sure that when they decide to read this book, whether they're downloading it for free or whether they're buying it for £5 or £20 or whatever, they want to make sure that the hours that they are that they are going to spend reading this book, they're not going to be wasted. They're not going to want to throw the book across the room when they're a third of the way done with this. And so the cover must look like the kind of book that they want to read. The blurb has to fulfill the promise that the cover put out there. And then those first few pages have to match the expectations that they have set. One of the examples that I often use is Back to Reality, the book that you wrote with Mr. D. And your first cover, you got a professional cover designer. You spent a long time with them, and there were a lot of relevant things to the book that happened that were thrown on the cover. But I remember an episode that you did 3 to 6 months after the book was released. And you both said, we realized that this looked like a nonfiction book. It didn't look like the kind of rollicking adventure that was in the book. And so meeting the reader expectations, they're looking at this and they're saying, oh, this is a nonfiction book. I talk about my second series, what became the Woodhead and Becker Mysteries, which was originally called Murders of Substance. And you and I had a conversation about, oh, I'm going to base this series on the
New
1987, exactly, New Order Substance album. And you're like, oh, that's a fantastic idea. You should totally do that. And I'm like, oh, yeah, the book cover is going to look just like the New Order Substance cover, the same fonts, the same stark white background. And just like Back to Reality, your first book cover in Back to Reality, my first book cover of that series looked like a nonfiction book. It did not look like a hard-boiled whodunit murder mystery. And I talk about how I changed the book cover. I still kept the murder weapon in book one was a syringe full of this poison. And so I kept the syringe on the cover. Well, you know what? That looked like a zombie apocalypse book or a post-apocalyptic thriller.
Yeah.
And even though it was, closer because it was a fiction book, all off genre. And so I wasn't meeting my readers' expectations with that. And you can see my early reviews are a lot lower than when I finally retitled the entire series. I was calling it the Murders of Substance series, but when hard-boiled murder mystery readers look at what books they want to read next, look at all the titles they have. They're all the sleuth name mysteries, or sometimes they're the place where the murders happen mysteries, the Florida Keys murders, that kind of thing. And so that's why I retitled the whole thing, to better meet those readers' expectations. And I think when people are early in their authors' careers, they have this idea that they are going to change the way people read. They're going to mash up a couple of genres that have never been mashed up before, and it's going to be fantastic. And they look at successful indie authors. Sean Inman springs to mind with his Middle Falls series. It's a time travel book, but it doesn't focus on the sci-fi elements of time travel. It focuses on the interpersonal relationships. They're all about people who have led unfulfilling lives. They die, and then they find themselves back as a teenager, or at the walking out of their house after they say, I want a divorce or something like that. And then they relive their lives. And the book doesn't end until they fix everything in their life that they screwed up. Which is not really a time travel book. And so people read this and like, oh, I love this. And it's on the bestseller list, the Amazon bestseller list. And I'm going to do something like that. Well, Sean Inman, I love those books, but he is the exception that proves the rule on this. If you try to mash something up like that, and there are many, many authors who do, you're not going to meet the reader expectations. I mean, I'm sure there were a lot of people who looked at that first cover and went, I don't know what this is. This is a time travel book, but it's not sci-fi. I don't understand what it is. And I think, he was able to overcome that. And I don't really know how. If I find out, that's probably going to be the topic of another book. But if you do that, and I don't know if this book is fantasy or sci-fi, it's got spaceships, but it's got swords and elves in it, or, it's a romance book, but I don't know the level of heatedness. Is this a sweet romance or is it a spicy romance? If your readers look at everything that you're putting out there, your Amazon page, your Barnes and Noble page, your Kobo page, and they can't figure out what kind of book they're getting, they're not going to click the buy button. They're not even going to click the download button if you offer it for free.
Absolutely. And discovering or trying to fathom what genre your book is can be really, really tricky, because we often lack the perspective to figure that, because we write things that we think are a unique take on the genre or whatever. One little tip for listeners, and I've tried this, is if you pop the first couple of chapters maybe, or at least a chapter, into Chat GPT or some other bot and say to it, what genre what category would you say this is, it usually comes back with a fairly accurate description. And I was very surprised by what it came back with. And I changed all the categories, and as a result, sales have lifted. So it's it can make a hell of a difference just trying to figure out what that actually is. So and the other thing, to be clear, Paul, we're not, as you said earlier on, we're not talking about writing to market. We're not saying, oh no, does that mean I have to write a Michael Connelly style thriller or a cozy detective story or whatever. You're not writing to market. You're just having a very, very clear idea of what your kind of reader is looking for and delivering on that promise, aren't you?
Exactly. Yes, it isn't about finding the hot thing this year that's going to sell. It's about making sure that your readers know what kind of book they're getting when they pick up your book. And if you have done a genre mashup, yes, it's going to be more challenging than if you've written a straight up crime fiction novel or a straight up, alien romance novel with high heat level. Mm-hmm. But you have to make sure that they don't pick up your book thinking it's a different genre or thinking that it's something else entirely.
Fantastic. And folks, in the book, Paul gives us brilliant little case studies for each, the success, the failure, the fiasco, saving a failure, and looking back on those failures and successes as well. So it's all in there. Some great little case studies as well. There's a whole section on getting ready to publish and editing and the cost of creating drafts and such. But then we come to chapter 8, which is your book is an advertisement, not a product. And you talk here about the hook and the look. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think just about all of us who have written our first book, almost all of us spent a really long time on that first book. Mm. We don't know what we're doing. So we spend, hours and hours every day trying to get one paragraph right. And that turns into 5 years, in my case, 8 years, finishing that first book. And as a result, we tend to be like, oh, this book is my precious. I love it so much. Now, in my case, that first book was book 1 in the Fenway Stevenson mysteries. And it is the book that I wanted to promote so that people could buy book 2 and book 3 and book 4 and book 5. But because I was thinking of that book as my precious, I wanted that precious book to have a price tag on it. And I was really loath to give it away for free because I felt that wouldn't place any value on it. One thing that I realized after I dropped that idea is that this book is really more of an advertisement than a product. It is the thing that is going to convince people to spend money on my stuff. Just like a very famous ad or a very effective ad would require the company to spend a lot of money on the ad and a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of creative energy on the ad. You've done that same thing with your entry point novel. And the people who were behind the famous Apple Macintosh 1984 ad, where the female runner comes into the thing and throws the hammer in the middle of the Big Brother screen, that is considered to be one of the greatest ads of all time. And Ridley Scott directed it, and he's gone on to Academy Award winning, BAFTA award winning director. And there were a lot of people who worked on it. It took months, if not years, to bring that from concept to completion to execution. And nobody there was like, this commercial is my precious. This needs to be in the short film category instead of an advertisement selling computers. No, what they did was they spent even more money, millions and millions and millions of dollars, putting it on the American football Super Bowl. And the Macintosh became a huge success. And, 35 years later, it's still, the flagship product of a large multinational company. And so if you think of that first book in your series, as that advertisement, that Apple Big Brother advertisement style thing that gets everything else sold in your catalog. That's the mindset to get to 4 figures a month, to get to that elusive $1,000 a month.
Yes, and you talk in the book about the marketing strategy known as product sampling. So this is all about building customers' trust, isn't it? It's about getting them on board for the other books on the journey. So where are you giving this book away? Are we talking about, a book funnel again? Are we talking about story origin, that kind of thing? Where else are you offering samples?
Yeah. So when you are ready, after you have a certain number of people in your mailing list, I advocate a product sampling marketing effort. And we've all seen at grocery stores or big box stores, we'll be pushing our shopping trolley along, and there's somebody, oh, would you like to try a sample of this sausage? Would you like to try this shot of mango smoothie? Would you like to try this pizza roll? And sure, that looks good. You bite the pizza roll, you're like, this is a delicious pizza roll. I'm going to buy the whole bag. Or I don't like this. This isn't my thing. And then you move on. Now, those companies who do the pizza rolls or the mango smoothies, they spend a lot of money to put a person in that grocery store to give away the free thing that they're doing. One great thing about being an indie author is that you don't have to hire anybody to give away the thing. Now, you can if you want. I mean, there are marketing costs involved. Book Funnel's $100 a year. You can buy promotions from these newsletter companies like Written Word Media has Free Booksy and Bargain Booksy, and there are a ton of others. We talked about BookBub Featured Deal last time, and of course that's the holy grail of these newsletter promo sites. And the idea is the same. You give away your first book, your entry point novel. And people are like, oh, I really like that. I'm going to buy the whole bag. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've looked on my reporting and seen that somebody has just purchased the entire series from books 2. I've got eight books in my Fenway series, from books 2 to 8. That somebody has bought, and I know that it's the same person because they might be in a country that usually doesn't buy my books. I had somebody from Lithuania buy books 2, Lithuania, 1 copy of book 2 all the way up to 1 copy of book 8. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's the same person. And it's really great to see that, because that your free first in series marketing effort is working if you see that. Now, one of the other things that the book says is that this plan might not be for everybody. A lot of people find that the free first in series doesn't necessarily work for them. Although I do think it's one of the more effective things out there if you do everything correctly in there. But some people may find that having a 99-cent book 1, or if they write a series of standalones, but they're all in the same universe or something like that. I know Aaron Wright, who is who runs Wide for the Win. She is a romance author, and she writes interconnected standalones. And instead of just promoting book 1 in her series, for 3 months, she'll promote book 1. And then 3 months after that, she'll put book 1 back on sale for $2.99 or $4.99 or whatever, and then do the free book 2. Uh-huh. Now, you'll get a lot of freebie seekers from that, but freebie seekers aren't gonna spend any money on your books anyway. And it's not like you're spending any extra money to get this book into their hands. Well, you're spending maybe a little bit of money if you look into everything, but it's negligible what you're doing. And from that, then she gets more opportunities, because she's got, I think, 6 or 8 books in her series. She has 6 books she can promote instead of me. I've only got my 1 book that I can promote. But this is how she builds her writing career. And unlike me, she doesn't have a day job. Being an author is her day job. And from that series, she's very successful.
You talk as well about one of the big problems for the first in the series novel is sometimes it might be the first book we've ever written, which makes it maybe not the best book that we've ever written. Maybe it meanders for the first few chapters. Maybe we spend too long introducing the setting or what have you. Now, you've suggested maybe going back and rewriting that and tightening it up. What's been your experience of that?
Yeah. So when I got a big promotion, and that was almost 3 years ago now, I got a big promotion and I called my editor and I was super excited. And my editor has edited every book since book 2, since Fenway book 2. And I said, yeah, this is great for Fenway book 1. Aren't you excited for me? And he said, no, your book 1. I mean, it's good after chapter 8, but for the first 7 chapters, it's not engaging. I don't know where the story's going. You introduce all your characters in one chapter and it's exhausting. And I was like, what? And he said, we've got to rewrite those first 7 chapters. I'm like, but the promotion's in 3 weeks. He's like, well, I guess we better get going then. So Max Christian Hansen is my editor. He and I tore apart those first 7 chapters. I didn't change the plot structure or anything like that. I did add an extra scene where Fenway went out to the crime scene with the sheriff. But just about everything else was structurally the same. But I added, I had a big thing early in my work where I did the thing where Fenway thought about blah, blah, blah. Fenway saw blah, blah, blah. Instead of just saying the car went down the road, I'd say Fenway saw the car go down the road. So I eliminated a lot of that. I tightened things up. I started putting a couple of breadcrumbs in there. I took some things where I thought I might be going somewhere later in the novel where it wound up not going there, and I took those out. I basically just tightened up the whole novel, added that one scene to make it much clearer what the stakes were early on. And I mean, my read-through percentage, and I talk in the book about how to calculate read-through percentage and how you want to get that up and all the levers you can pull to make that go up. Tightening those first 7 chapters really made a big difference in the people who were downloading the free book versus the people who were buying book 2. I mean, it was clear that was a huge sea change in getting people to finish the book instead of just downloading it and then thinking, hey, that Paul Austin Ardoin guy is a pretty good writer. I wonder what else he's done.
Yeah. And that's your hook, isn't it? That's the hook. We talked about the hook and the look. That's the thing that is really keeping readers on the hook and keeping them coming back for more. And then you talk about step 2, which is the look, where the book, and this does require investment, folks, this is where the book needs to be indistinguishable from everything else on the market, particularly traditionally published books. Tell us about your experience with that.
I was reading the audiobook version of this, and I realized that I said the phrase indistinguishable from a traditionally published book about, 10 or 20 times in the book. But it's really important because, as a reader looking for something new to read, they don't want to see something that they think is going to be of poor quality. They want something that looks professionally edited. They want something that looks professionally designed. They want to know that there were a bunch of people in a room somewhere who was like, you know what, this book is good enough to publish, and not just you sitting at your computer going, I'm going to hit publish on Amazon KDP now. I mean, even if that is the case, but we have to convince people that this book is good enough for you to spend the next 5 to 10 hours of your life reading and enjoying. And so the professionalism is really part of it. Now, I am not I spent the first 5 years of my career as a graphic designer, but I do not do book covers well. I hired a professional to do my book covers. I also am not one of those people who can self-edit my own work. I know a few authors who do self-edit their work, and one of them is good enough to self-edit their work. The other ones don't. I don't think do a great job. And the same thing with your book description or your book blurb. As authors, we're too close to what we've written to be able to put the sales copy together for it. Not a synopsis, not here's all the plot points that happen in here, but the sales copy that will say, why do you want to pick up this book and read it? It is so much easier, and it's actually pretty cheap to hire somebody who has done this before to put together 3 or 4 paragraphs for you to make sure that people, I might like that. I'm going to hit the look inside, or I'm just going to hit the buy now button. So as a graphic designer, I did have enough experience in production design to be able to design the interior of my book and make it look professional. So I did that and saved some money for myself. They've got this thing called vellum now, which saves.
Love vellum.
Yeah, I mean, it saves me 5 days of work on what I used to do, and it looks indistinguishable from a traditionally published book. But for those people who think they can do it all in themselves, it's really difficult to do. And if you do, I have a whole chapter in the book about starting with no money. If you don't have any money to spend on anything, here's what you can do to replace a professional editor. Here's what you can do to replace a professional book cover designer. Here's what you can do to replace a professional proofreader. But you got to temper your expectations with that, because the chances is that somebody's going to be looking at that book and there's going to be something in their head that goes, something that doesn't look quite right about this, and I can't put my finger on it. I don't think anybody would say, most readers wouldn't be able to identify that they know it's not professional in the front of their cortex.
But they know. They know. Don't
they know.
Yeah.
They know there's something different about it.
Yeah. Well, folks, like I say, this is kind of just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole section on where to sell your books, on promoting your books, pricing strategy, putting it all together. There's a terrific sort of 18-month timeline on how to make this happen, including a whole section on troubleshooting. It's terrific, absolutely terrific. Like I say, we're going to have a link in the show notes so you can check that out. Paul, where can people find you and your books?
I can be found at my website, www.paulaustinardoin.com, and Ardoin is spelled Ardon.
Fantastic. And apologies for mispronouncing your surname earlier. Sorry.
It happens quite a bit. It's no problem at all.
I've known you for so long, I should know by now. Anyway, folks, check it out. It's terrific, and it's a book. I've highlighted so many sections of this book as well. Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. I'm looking forward to the next book, maybe $2,000 a month, or from 0 to 5 figures. Let's think big, and hope to speak to you again real soon.
I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, Mark. Thanks very much.
Peter.